Imagine, if you will, a small American town, one where lies and conspiracies are as common as the heinous actions said cover-ups stem from. Here there lives a man by the name of Otis P. Hazelrig, age unknown, job U.S. mail letter carrier. Mr. Hazelrig, like the town he resides in, has a number of secrets of his own.
Excuse me, you can't be filming in here, I'm sorry.
I first watched Dark Night of the Scarecrow a couple of years ago after finding it on the Roku channel, which has proven to be a surprisingly fruitful resource for horror flicks from the 70s and 80s. I was quite early into my days of watching more obscure horror films, and yet I knew there was something special about this one. It wears the clothes of a low-budget, made-for-TV movie with a basic plot, and it is that. But it's also well shot, smartly written and carefully directed, and has some fantastic performances. Watching this was like stumbling upon a Michelin star meal served in a 7-Eleven. Needless to say, it set an unfairly high standard that I don't think has ever been reached by another film in its genre, excluding films whose reputations precede them. When I first put it on, I allowed its made-for-TV label to shape my expectations, and was pleasantly surprised with how the film tackles some very mature themes with a surprising level of nuance and subtext, including themes of leadership, morality, and even child abuse. Anyway, I've glazed it enough already. I do recommend watching this movie, and I'm giving you a spoiler warning now. It's only been out for 45 years, so I know some of you probably haven't had a chance to watch it yet. But, without any further ado, here is my analysis on Dark Night of the Scarecrow. The film opens with Bubba, our protagonist, who is later described by his own mother as a man with a child's mind.
Don't you understand? He loves children. He plays with them because he's no older than them in his head.
He sings a song with Mary Lee, a young girl who he spends a lot of time with. The song they sing reoccurs throughout the film. The lyrics go something like this.
Smile with glee, just for you and me, just for you and me.
This goes into my first piece of analysis, and as with everything else I say, it might not be true. However, it's quite coincidental that there are 4 villains in this film. Skeeter, who wears a red cap and is seen wearing red throughout the film. Philby, who wears yellow shirts and pants at various times. Harless, who consistently rocks his green plaid shirt up to the very moment he's ground into hamburger.
You here 1 minute, and the next one, Parker ground himself up in his brush machine last night.
And the main antagonist, Otis P. Hazelrig, the local mailman, tyrant, and chief of the morality police, who sports an iconic blue U.S. mail letter carrier fit. According to IMDb trivia, the name Otis P. Hazelrig was decided for the character after screenwriter J.D. Feigelson saw it on a sign. Though, I'm not sure if the middle initial was on that sign, or if it's simply following the trope of strange characters having a mysterious P for their middle name. The scene progresses, and we see that Bubba and Mary Lee are picking flowers. Bubba picks one, but crushes the petals in the process. This turns into a lesson, as Mary Lee teaches Bubba to pick flowers by the stem. To me, this communicates the essence of their relationship. It isn't a normal child-adult relationship where the adult is protecting and teaching the child. In many ways, Mary Lee is the adult. She seemingly spends more time with Bubba than anyone else, and has endless patience for him, unlike many of the other adults in the town. She brings out the most gentle parts of him, the parts that pick flowers by their stems. And it's her childlike innocence and genuine desire to help Bubba that helps him more than any other method. Especially the more violent methods we'll learn that some of the townsfolk have used to teach him. The atypical nature of Bubba and Mary Lee's relationship is further built upon with a scene that comes later in the film, showing that Mary Lee views herself as the one helping Bubba.
can't sing Flower Song by himself. He only knows his ABCs up to G.
Mary Lee then crafts a lei from the flowers they picked and puts it around Bubba's neck. She asks for a kiss in return, which is met by hesitation from Bubba, before he finally gives in and allows Mary Lee to kiss his cheek. This is where the darkest aspect of my analysis comes in. I believe there are two reasons, aside from his childlike timidness, that he showed so much hesitation. The first reason being that on some level he understands that he is a man and she is a child, and he knows that if that action was observed by any of the townsfolk, who we soon learn have taught him lessons before, they'll teach him a lesson again. And the second, and more sinister reason, is that I theorize Bubba was sexually abused as a child. Not only would it partly explain his hesitation with Mary Lee, but it would help to explain some bombshells that drop later in the film. Bubba and Mary Lee have an audience, Otis P. Hazelrig, the film's primary antagonist. But there's a case to be made that he's even the protagonist. Your first question may be, why was he spying on them? And the answer for the first-time viewer is that he's a bully who watches Bubba like a hawk, waiting for one tiny slip-up so he can justify inflicting pain upon someone he views as beneath him. But for the second-time viewer, we know he's watching them because he's a Peter-phile. I mean, the first answer holds true as well. Power fantasies are another theme that appears throughout the film. Hazelrig desires nothing more than exacting power over others, and because he's a weak man who perceives himself as strong, he surrounds himself with other weak men who will follow him, and chooses weaker men to fulfill his fantasies. The second question you may have is, why is he upset? For the first-time viewer, it's because he just witnessed a man and a child act inappropriately with each other. But for the second-time viewer, it's because he's jealous. Hazelrig is jealous that Bubba doesn't have to try to get something that he wants so much more than Bubba. Hazelrig and Bubba are true opposites, as in some ways, both desire the affection of Mary Lee, but Bubba has the purest of intentions and doesn't even know what to do with the affection that Mary Lee is freely giving him, while Hazelrig is evil incarnate and knows exactly what he would do if he had Mary Lee. Hazelrig zooms off and visits Harless, one of his many allies. They talk about Bubba and his problematic behavior, but it's obvious that Harless is truly upset due to the inappropriate nature of Bubba and Mary Lee's relationship, and he doesn't have any ulterior motives besides perhaps wanting to rough up someone who won't fight back, and feel a little drunk on power himself. To me, the most interesting part of this scene is this.
You know what he's liable to do? Yes. Well, let's get down there and break it up then.
Their choice of wording fascinates me. It's vague. What is the thing he's liable to do? Harless could have simply said, "We gotta go before he hurts her," but the way he speaks makes me wonder if Harless's perception of Bubba was made more hateful due to the lies Hazelrig spread about him. Maybe old Otis projected onto Bubba the feelings he himself was having toward Mary Lee. The scene goes on with Hazelrig implying there has to be something done to Bubba to make sure he can't misstep again. This is the first time of many that Hazelrig suggests something or acts in a way that goes too far, causing Harless to respond with this.
Hey, Otis, I'll kick him around a little, have a little fun with him, but well, that's as far as I'm gonna go.
Hazelrig responds to him by asking what he would do if something happened out there. Harless responds by saying that would change things, that it would give him a reason to do something permanent about Bubba, setting up the razor-thin ice Bubba is walking on in the eyes of Otis and his goons. In the next scene, we see Bubba and Mary Lee walking along before Mary Lee notices a fountain in someone's backyard that she finds pretty. She tries convincing Bubba to sneak in the backyard with her, but Bubba responds by saying he can't, and that he'll get in trouble. This could imply that he may have done something similar in the past, allowing his childish urges to overtake his actions, trumping his better judgment, which may have resulted in him being taught a lesson by the townsfolk. Mary Lee decides to go in without Bubba, and fools around as Bubba watches from the other side of the fence. To both their surprises, a dog is in the yard and attacks Mary Lee as Bubba tries to intervene. Bubba knocks on the door of Mary Lee's home, and when her mother answers, we see Bubba holding Mary Lee's body as he says the film's famous four-word sentence, "Bubba didn't do it."
Bubba didn't do it!
Harless speeds over to the post office where he tells Otis that it's happened, name-dropping Bubba Ritter and saying it was just like Otis said. Without Harless having to specify, Hazelrig asks if it was Mary Lee. I'm sure she occupies his mind during a substantial portion of the day. He then asks how bad, implying his speculation regarding how exactly Bubba abused her. Harless tells Otis that Mary Lee's dead, which prompts him to retrieve a 6-shooter from his dedicated gun drawer at the postal office. I wonder for what other reasons he might have had the pistol. Maybe he was just moments away from going postal.
Hi there, would you like to sign my petition?
What's going on here?
But one thing's for certain, Hazelrig was waiting to take matters into his own hands, wanting to perform a bit of the old frontier justice as a way to, once again, feel powerful and get rid of his competition for good. So, the boys round up Skeeter and Philby, getting the whole gang together to put a stop to Bubba's reign of terror. A scared Bubba runs home as the gang chases after him. Bubba knows what will happen to him if he's caught, because he knows that no matter what he tells them, they won't believe him, because they haven't in the past and won't start now. Philby stops running and takes some pills, setting up some sort of illness or condition he has. Perhaps a heart one. Bubba finally reaches his mother, played by Jocelyn Brando, Marlon Brando's older sister. She comforts him as he tells her Mary Lee was hurt, but he didn't do it. She tells Bubba that she won't let them hurt him, before saying how when anything happens in the town, Bubba's always the first one blamed. She then says this.
Now you remember what we did the last time. We played a game, the hiding game, remember?
Saying remember last time tells us that Bubba being chased home is a repeat incident. Bubba agrees to play the hiding game to escape the warpath of Otis and his droogs, as Mrs. Ritter holds down the fort. The gang arrives, spears in hand, to tell Mrs. Ritter that Bubba's a wanted man. She tells them Bubba wouldn't hurt anyone, especially not a child, considering he's no older than them in his head, and that they're just there to torment Bubba like they always do. She slams the door on them, leaving them to use their dogs to track down Bubba's scent. Something to note is that if Bubba just went inside his home instead of running off to play the hiding game, what happens next likely wouldn't have happened, as the gang simply left Mrs. Ritter alone to look for Bubba. This is neither here nor there, just an observation. The dogs lead them to a Scarecrow. Confused and frustrated, Hazelrig approaches the dogs as Skeeter seems hesitant, literally saying,
Get out! Don't kick him, Mr. Hazelrig. He's okay.
Revealing another bit of information about Otis. He's abused animals in the past. Speaking of the dogs, it's interesting how a dog was what attacked Mary Lee, beginning this entire chain of events. The dogs are what they also use to track down Bubba. Hazelrig has attacked dogs, like how he has attacked Bubba, but eventually, particularly when backed into a corner, a dog will bite back. Hazelrig looks into the eyes of the Scarecrow, seeing Bubba stare back, stained with fear. Hazelrig steps away, points his gun at Bubba, and all Bubba can say is,
Bubba didn't do it.
but that doesn't matter. Hazelrig, so blinded by his hate that he didn't even care to know the truth, fires a shot into Bubba, with the other three following by emptying their guns into him. This scene is a microcosm, or maybe a macrocosm, of Hazelrig's dynamic with the others. He, once again, took it too far, doing something that prompted the other fellas to follow along with something they wouldn't have otherwise done. Harless gets a radio call from his truck, saying that they called off the search for Bubba a half hour ago. Mary Lee is actually alive, and it turns out that Bubba saved her life. But it's too late. Everyone wears a look of sadness and regret on their faces, except for Hazelrig, whose main concern is setting Bubba up to look like it was self-defense by placing a pitchfork in his hand. Then, the winds of change. In the next scene, Otis and his gang are on trial for the murder of Bubba Ritter. We're introduced to Sam Willock, the district attorney who wants to see Hazelrig and the others in jail for what they did. The defense sets up weak arguments, making the case that Bubba had a weapon, the pitchfork, and they were only acting out of self-defense. The judge addresses Otis by his first name, applying a camaraderie between them. Hazelrig has friends in high places, perhaps because he wishes to be in said high places. A town like this, where everyone works together, even to get away with murder, is a breeding ground for conspiracies and secrets and lies. As we'll see, everyone wants to forget the killing of Bubba because it's too messy. They would rather live in ignorance than face the ugly, uncomfortable truth. Hazelrig lies under oath, saying that he gave Bubba several opportunities to surrender himself, which forces the judge to release them from custody, causing Mrs. Ritter to justifiably flip out, spouting about there being other justice in the world besides the law. This sets up some other themes in the film of supernatural justice, and a universal balancing out of things, almost of a karmic nature. The gang leaves the courtroom, celebrating before Sam stops them, telling them that if he ever finds a shred of evidence, he'll see them on death row. Hazelrig shrugs off his threat, looking at his pocket watch and telling Sam he's more concerned about missing fried chicken night at the boarding house.
Chicken! I thought he'd go drop this deep!
The boys celebrate at the bar as the winds of change blow us to Mary Lee's house, where she rests in her bed, as her parents discuss how they never knew Mary Lee was so attached to Bubba. Mary Lee's mother confesses that she didn't have the heart to tell her that Bubba was killed, and her father says that it's best not to tell her anything. In his words,
"Don't tell her anything. Just let it lie."
this continues the conspiracy growing around Bubba, showing that the parents are complacent with the cover-up. They don't want to risk the ugliness it takes to address the truth because to them, it's not worth it. It's interesting to think about all the things in the world that have happened that may not reach the light of day because of people like this, who would rather sweep everything under the rug. Luckily, in the world of Dark Night of the Scarecrow, there is other justice in the world besides the law, which has failed the memory of Bubba. Mary Lee is awoken by the restless breeze through her window. Immediately, she calls out to Bubba. It's as if the wind itself is Bubba, calling to Mary Lee. She escapes through her window, leaving the lay she made with Bubba on her bedside. Mary Lee runs to the Ritter house, looking for Bubba, before entering and seeing Bubba's lay lying on top of a Bible on the coffee table. The Bible itself may be symbolic of the justice besides the law Bubba's mother spoke about. How, regardless of what you've done and what you've paid for on earth, God will be the true judge of your actions. A judge you can't lie to. It may also be there as Bubba's profession of his innocence. In the same way Hazelrig was sworn in by the Bible in the courtroom and yet lied, Bubba used his daisy chain, a symbol of innocence, to swear atop the Bible that Bubba didn't do it. How exactly did the lay get there, though? If you remember, Bubba was wearing his lay when he ran off to play the hiding game, meaning Bubba himself must have placed it there. I will say, the image of a living scarecrow wandering around his old house and placing a chain of daisies on a Bible is a haunting image, one that we may not have seen because there is a second option. Now, this theory is a bit rough, and I don't actually believe it to be true based on some other things that happen later in the film, but I think it's worth exploring anyway. The theory I'm proposing is that Mary Lee has essentially The Shining, or some sort of telekinetic and/or perceptive gift when it comes to the spirit world. In this theory, Mary Lee and Bubba are interlinked. We'll get back to this theory later. There is also a third option, that Mrs. Ritter retrieved the lay from Bubba after he was killed. But it's a boring option. Plus, why would there be an emphasis on the fact that Bubba's lay is there if the reason is such an obvious one? Plus, Mrs. Ritter likely would not have understood the significance of the lay even if she had the opportunity to take it. Mary Lee then walks upstairs, which, based on the exterior, shouldn't be there. Mrs. Ritter finds her and tells her that Bubba's gone. with Mary Lee not quite picking up what she's putting down. Mary Lee then continues, saying that Bubba can't sing the flower song by himself, and he only knows his ABCs up to G. This further proves my earlier point that Mary Lee views herself as more of the mature one in their relationship. She teaches Bubba, and views herself as the only one who can teach him. Mrs. Ritter then begins to cry as Mary Lee reassures her and says that she'll help her find Bubba. Mary Lee then runs off, with Mrs. Ritter running after her. She then finds Mary Lee sitting in front of the place where Bubba was killed, the Scarecrow stand, that looks a whole lot like a cross. Going along with the religious symbolism in the film, Bubba was executed while attached to the stand, like how Christ was crucified on the cross. And also, like Christ, Bubba has seemingly returned from death, leaving behind an empty cross. Another thing to point out is that earlier in the film, when Bubba was killed, what I've been referencing as the winds of change began. This is reminiscent of an event known as the Crucifixion Darkness, a time when the sky became dark after the crucifixion of Jesus. One thing to mention is that the night scenes in the film were actually filmed at night, not day for night like how a lot of films choose to shoot. Night for night is much more difficult, as the lack of light, difficulty to make artificial light look realistic, and added stress of having to film in the dark makes it a less feasible option. However, when pulled off right, it's a desired look that's hard to replicate. Mary Lee sings the flower song from earlier, mentioning the colors of red, yellow, green, and blue, before saying to Mrs. Ritter that Bubba's not gone, he's just playing the hiding game. Maybe, with her perceptive abilities, Mary Lee can sense Bubba, while Bubba's own mother can't. Maybe Bubba isn't even around in any physical sense, but as an energy which is felt by Mary Lee only. Maybe what happens later in the film is Mary Lee's doing, even if she doesn't know it's her. It could be Bubba's will working vicariously through Mary Lee, perhaps even utilizing her telekinetic abilities. It's often considered that children are more in-tuned with the spirit world, so it's not impossible. In the next scene, Hazel Rigg delivers mail, stopping once to look through someone else's pornographic magazine, with a surprising look of faint moral righteousness. To me, this shows Hazel Rigg passes judgment onto others, while also partaking in the very same sins. Also, the look of interest at first, that then turns into a look of condescending disgust, might show how these aren't exactly the type of girls Hazel Rigg is into, if you get my meaning. He's a pervert, with his own proclivities being far worse and more serious than what's found in a penthouse magazine. Hazel Rigg delivers mail to Harless's wife before driving away, giving Harless a wave. Harless waves back unenthusiastically. I'd like to think that since the death of Bubba, Hazel Rigg's relationship with the other fellas has suffered. Perhaps they're slowly beginning to realize how extreme Hazel Rigg acted, and figure that they're better off not being too close to him. At any rate, Harless's wife goes over to him, hard at work, maintaining his wood chipper. She tells him about the Halloween carnival. She then looks off into the distance and asks if he has started planting. Harless responds, in a manner becoming of a borderline abusive husband, that of course he hasn't, and why would she ask a lame brain thing like that? She responds with,
Well, I just thought it's kind of strange. I mean, if you're not planting, why would you put up a scarecrow?
After seeing the Scarecrow in his field, Harless drives over to the diner where he confronts Skeeter and Philby about putting the Scarecrow in his field to try and scare him. Of course, they respond by saying they have no idea what he's talking about. Cut to Bunch's boarding house. Hazel Rigg drinks alcohol and stares at his picture of General Patton and his bust of Napoleon Bonaparte, two famous leaders who he undoubtedly aspires to be. Otis wants to be powerful. He wants to be great, and maybe even imagines himself among the names of great leaders. But he isn't one. He's a man in the later half of his life who has never done much more than lick stamps.
Who do you think you are? The only thing official you ever done is lick stamps. Now get off my place!
And he lives at a boarding house, which is essentially a more socially acceptable version of living in Mommy's basement. a place where someone else can cook his meals and do his laundry for him, because though he has plans for world domination, he can't even wash his own socks. Unlike me. Mrs. Bunch tells Hazelrig through his door that he has visitors. Hazelrig puts his gun away, which may have been out during a contemplation of suicide, before squirting breath spray in his mouth to mask the scent of booze in an attempt to keep up appearances. Hazelrig hesitantly and nervously agrees to speak with the fellas in his room. They tell him that Harless saw the Scarecrow in his yard, and someone must know what they did to Bubba. Hazelrig convinces them that it's Sam Willock, the district attorney, doing it as a way to bait them into acting guilty so he can see them go to jail. A method that seemingly worked. Hazelrig tells them that the best course of action is to act as if nothing happened, so they won't convict themselves. A drunk Harless drives home, don't drink and drive, and sees the Scarecrow stand lie empty in his yard. He's about to go inside his house when he begins to hear rumbling from his barn. He turns off the wood chipper in his barn and begins looking around to find the trespasser, calling out to Sam. Harless climbs up to his loft, but is spooked by the sound of the wood chipper being turned on again. Without being pushed or anything, Harless falls off the loft, hanging onto the light for dear life before it gives way and he's turned into jam, in what I think is one of the best transitions I've ever seen. It's curious to me that we never see the person responsible for Harless's demise. Really, the only thing that certainly occurred by someone's doing was the wood chipper being turned on and Harless being baited onto the loft by the debris falling. He wasn't pushed, and yet his death was executed precisely. Later in the film, we'll see some things that undeniably occur supernaturally, with no physical being causing them to happen. So the question is, who is making it happen? The obvious answer is Bubba, or Bubba's spirit rather, but Mary Lee is not off the suspect list. Moving on to the scene that was so graciously transitioned to, and immediately there's an observation. Mrs. Bunch scoops jam onto Hazelrig's plate. The jam is obviously supposed to be blood, Harless's blood, which is placed onto Otis's plate. Hazelrig literally has the blood of Harless on his plate, and he has the gall to ask for more.
More preserves, Mr. Hazelrig?
Mm-hmm.
There you are.
A little more, please.
Oh, my pleasure.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Because Hazelrig has a bloodlust. Hazelrig is told by an old man in the boarding home, who is somehow privy to this information, that Harless ground himself up in his brush machine last night. Hazelrig goes to Harless's house, where he sees his wife being escorted into a police car. Sam Willock and Hazelrig catch each other's gaze. That night, Skeeter and Philby visit Hazelrig at the post office. From their conversation, it's clear that the two are becoming regretful with what they did to Bubba, feeling that he was innocent and saved Mary Lee's life. They're also scared for their own lives, after what happened to Harless. Hazelrig won't budge on his stance of Bubba, still believing that what they did was right. And he also believes that Harless's death was only an accident, even with all the strange details surrounding his death. The strangest of all being them wondering who turned the wood chipper off after Harless died. Hazelrig, not willing to admit foul play, says that it must have ran out of gas, and to settle it, they go to check. They go to the barn and find a piece of Harless's green shirt. Green is gone, all that remains is red, yellow, and blue. They check the level of gas by sticking the back of a hoe into the tank, revealing it to be almost full. Hazelrig concludes that the same person who turned it off must be the same one who turned it on. Hazelrig drives over to Mrs. Ritter's house to deliver a package. Mary Lee leaves the house. As Hazelrig sees her, he calls her name, but she runs away. He knocks on Mrs. Ritter's door, who answers, surprised to see Hazelrig. She's shocked by his nerve, but he tells her he's just doing his job and needs her to sign. After she does, Hazelrig tells her that Harless died. Mrs. Ritter isn't surprised and doesn't seem all too sad. She goes on to say that there is other justice in the world, with Hazelrig finishing her quote.
There's other justice in this world.
Besides the law.
It's a fact.
This tells us that in addition to Otis remembering what she told him in the courtroom, he may also share the sentiment. It was certainly a sentiment he had when he took justice into his own hands to deal with Bubba. She then recites a verse found in Galatians 6, telling Hazelrig,
"What you sow, so shall you reap,"
which fits in with previous biblical themes. Hazelrig then suggests that Mrs. Ritter was the one who killed Harless.
An eye for an eye.
Tooth for a tooth, hand for a hand, foot for a foot.
A life for a life.
Now, just a minute.
To which she responds by fully denying, not even cryptically suggesting that it might be her. He then tells her that it's even now. She tells him that
It ain't even. Not so long as you're walking.
Then the bombshell.
You don't fool me, Hazelrig, not for a minute. I've seen how you look at that little girl. You may think you got the rest of them fooled, but I know exactly what you are. Stay away from her, Hazelrig. This is a small town. Everybody talks. You just remember what I told you, Hazelrig.
Mrs. Ritter suggests that Hazelrig has evil intentions when he looks at Mary Lee. His response is to run away, not even saying another word to defend himself. To me, this is an admission of guilt. I mean, look at his expression. It's as if he knows someone finally figured out his deepest, darkest secret. This might answer why Mary Lee ran away from him. To my knowledge, Mary Lee was never told that Hazelrig was responsible for Bubba's death. Furthermore, she doesn't even believe Bubba is dead to begin with. So, why did she run away when Hazelrig pulls up to the house? It could easily be because Mrs. Ritter openly despises him, which has rubbed off on Mary Lee. It could also be that Bubba, or his spirit, told Mary Lee what Hazelrig did to him. This is the option that's most believable, as Mary Lee claims that Bubba told her this a couple scenes later. But maybe it's Mary Lee's own discernment, with some assistance from the other side, which has made known to her that Hazelrig is a Peter-phile, or someone who will cause her harm. Another question this brings up is how could Mrs. Ritter see through Hazelrig's facade to the ugly truth? Because I believe she's seen it before, with Bubba. This is the most supporting evidence I have for my claim that Bubba was abused as a child. Maybe even by Hazelrig himself, though I don't have much proof for this, besides suggesting that this might be why Hazelrig has had it out for Bubba. Since he abused him, he's afraid of what Bubba might say about him, so he always keeps him in line. This could also explain why he killed him, to take away any chance he had of telling anyone the truth about Hazelrig. I'm inclined to believe, however, that Bubba was abused as a child, perhaps by his unknown father, and Mrs. Ritter was able to recognize the signs, either before or after the truth of what was happening to Bubba was revealed. And because of this, she's able to recognize the way in which Hazelrig looks at Mary Lee, the same way Bubba's abuser looked at him. Hazelrig runs back to his mail van as Mrs. Ritter shouts that Otis may have everyone else fooled, but not her. She knows exactly what he is. Some subtext to her saying fooled may be in specific regard to Bubba. The real reason he was so passionate about picking on him was because Hazelrig viewed Bubba as an obstacle between him and Mary Lee. And the reason he was willing to kill Bubba was because he took Mary Lee away from him. Hazelrig fooled everyone by hiding behind pure intentions, but it was never really about justice. It was always about Mary Lee. Mrs. Ritter then says that it's a small town, everybody talks, going back to the themes of the sort of hive mindset that's easy to develop when living in a town like theirs. Next, we see Philby horking down a sandwich before he sees the Scarecrow in his field. He runs over and is brought down to his knees, seemingly by his heart condition, as the music swells and the wind blows. We then go to the Halloween party, where Hazelrig spies on Mary Lee as she goes off with her friends to play hide and seek. When she finishes her countdown, she opens her eyes to see Hazelrig waiting for her. He tries to get Mary Lee to admit what she knows to him. Thanks to the masterful acting by Charles Durning, and the great child performance by Tanya Crowe, who wears a timid and fearful face, and what we know about Hazelrig, this scene, to me, is absolutely bone-chilling. Hazelrig asks Mary Lee to whisper in his ear what she knows. She goes up to him and tells him that she knows what he did to Bubba, and that he lied about it, even admitting that Bubba himself told her, which Hazelrig refuses to believe. She runs away, and Hazelrig tries to catch her, but is stopped by a conveniently timed and placed security guard. Since Mary Lee knows that Hazelrig lied about what happened, Bubba must have been who told her. Either that, or it's thanks to some omniscience she has. Hazelrig is redirected to the party where he's offered a drink. He's told of an alcoholic option before the lady serving remembers that Hazelrig apparently doesn't drink, even though we saw him earlier in the room drinking out of the public eye, and we'll see him do the same thing later. He's then given the regular punch before serving himself the fixed option after the woman leaves. Once again, this shows Hazelrig as two people, the one who he shows himself to be, the community member and friendly neighborhood mailman, and the man he truly is, the one who, behind closed doors, does the things himself that he judges others for. His prudish morality is all a front. He acts high and mighty and doesn't even do the things that people wouldn't judge him for if he did them, like drinking. But it's all as a way to virtue signal so that he can hide the things he does or feels that people would judge him for, things he might even be arrested for. Philby and Skeeter meet Hazelrig at the party, where Philby tells Hazelrig that he saw it. The Scarecrow symbolizes guilt and responsibility. It haunts them in the same way their memories do. They go to Philby's, where the Scarecrow has now disappeared. Hazelrig gives Philby a "you might be crazy" look, prompting Philby to say he's not crazy. Hazelrig suggests coming back in the morning, but Philby says he can't wait until then. Hazelrig tells him they at least need to get inside, or else someone might see them and think they're suspicious. Philby then snaps at Otis, asking him if that's all he's worried about, what people might think. Philby is more concerned with the cosmic justice Mrs. Ritter spoke about than even going to jail. And we know this because Skeeter then suggests that they should go to the sheriff. Hazelrig objects, but Philby says he'd rather go to jail than die. Even though he's still only looking out for himself, it's funny how his way of doing that is, in a roundabout way, suggesting justice for Bubba. But before making what would likely be the right decision that might even save his life, Philby pushes on to Hazelrig that he got him into this, and he needs to get him out, or he's turning himself in. We then go to Mrs. Ritter, who sits by the fire and knits. She hears her door slamming and goes to find her door is open. She puts the kettle on before going back to her chair. Hazelrig comes from behind her, putting his hand over her mouth, and tells her that he knows it's her who's been panicking the men. He tells her that the game is up and they're even. He removes his hand, but she screams, so Hazelrig blocks her mouth again before telling her he's not gonna hurt her. He gets up, continuing to talk to her before realizing he has killed her. For whatever reason, maybe she couldn't breathe, maybe he scared her to death, but whatever it was, I take this as meaning that death is literally on Hazelrig's hands. He's a cursed man. Hazelrig panics, running away and tripping all over the place. He reaches the door, but is broken from his flight instinct by the sound of the kettle. The evil gears in his head begin to turn as he switches the gas on the stovetop to full throttle before driving away, causing the house to explode. The next day, Mary Lee makes her way over to Mrs. Ritter's house, picking daisies on the way. She notices the house is gone. Sam Willock and the police investigate. The sheriff is certain it's an accidental gas leak, with no speculation of foul play. Sam asks the police to look over the house again, saying all he's looking for is one shred. Going back to the earlier scene where Sam promises Hazelrig that if he finds one shred of evidence, they're going away for good. In a montage, Mary Lee sings the flower song. Hazelrig delivers mail, unbothered, and Philby and Skeeter's minds wander in concern as they work. It's now night. Philby hears his pigs making a ruckus something fierce. He goes to investigate, finding nothing. He hears something from behind the silo, but finds only a dangling chain. He laughs it off as he returns to his house, but sees someone in there turning off a light. Immediately, he goes to his car to leave, but can't start it. He takes a heart pill and tries to fix his car, but hears footsteps, so he takes refuge in the silo. Obviously, Philby gets stuck inside, and the grain machine is turned on, mummifying him in a glutinous grave. Yellow is gone, though, like green, not killed directly. Red and blue remain. Philby's death, even more than Harless's, was Hazelrig's fault, as he convinced him to not do what was right by turning himself in, which maybe would have saved him. Hazelrig visits Skeeter at his work. All he has to say is Philby, before Skeeter flips out. Hazelrig tries to calm Skeeter, telling him it was an accident, but Skeeter doesn't buy it, and he doesn't care if people know about what happened. He just doesn't want to die. Hazelrig doesn't believe it was an accident either, as he tells Skeeter that it was Bubba. Skeeter says it can't be him, they killed him, but the way he says it is more like a plea, like an admission of guilt. He doesn't care who's doing it, he just knows he's next. Hazelrig tells him that he knows it's Bubba because Mary Lee told him he's still alive. He then tells Skeeter that he just wants a chance to prove that it's Bubba. Skeeter agrees, although I'm not sure if you can rightly call it agreeing. More like coercion by Hazelrig once again. Hazelrig is so much more concerned about who's doing it to try to stop it, but both Philby and Skeeter just want to be alive. And to them, it's not about who's doing it, it's about justice for Bubba's murder, as they know they murdered him. And maybe, through justice, by turning themselves in, can their lives be spared. It's too late for Philby, but perhaps not for Skeeter. That night, Hazelrig and Skeeter go to Bubba's grave. Skeeter is hesitant to dig it up, but Hazelrig says they have to know and forces him to help. They eventually get to the casket, and Skeeter says this.
Mr. Hazelrig, if he's in there, that don't leave nobody but his spirit.
Open it.
Skeeter opens the grave, and there lies the body of Bubba, though we don't see it. Skeeter completely loses it and runs off, but Hazelrig tackles him and hits him, while Skeeter pleads that they need to get out now. He then goes on to say, there's no one left to blame but us, as if Skeeter has accepted his fate but wants to run anyway in a last attempt to save his life. But Hazelrig is an ignorant and stubborn man. He can't admit to himself or to anyone else that a supernatural justice is occurring, because that would mean that Hazelrig is on the receiving end of that justice, a place he's never been before and can't believe he can ever be. He tells Skeeter that it must be Mary Lee, with Skeeter responding by saying he knows what Otis is thinking, and he doesn't want any part of it, implying Hazelrig is contemplating killing Mary Lee. Hazelrig then begins to seemingly strangle Skeeter, before stopping himself, further attempting to calm Skeeter down by kissing his forehead, and telling him that they'll do it his way and go to the police, but first, they need to cover the body back up. In what has to be my favorite scene in the film, Hazelrig convinces Skeeter to get back in the grave. By this point, Skeeter is clutching onto the last shred of his sanity. He begins reminiscing to Hazelrig about a cousin of his who lives in Arkansas, where there's nobody around, and how he used to spend summers there as a kid. Skeeter is mentally retreating to a time of innocence in his life. All that has happened in the last while has been too much on him. Otis can't take it, however. Perhaps because there was never a time when he was innocent. Hazelrig is completely rotten to his core, and likely he perceives Skeeter as a man who finally lost it, and who he can't take any chances with. As he himself said earlier, we've come this far, it's almost over. What difference does another death mean if it secures Hazelrig's freedom? So, he bludgeons Skeeter over his head with a shovel, and buries him in Bubba's grave to eternally rest with the man he helped murder. A thought I have is whether the forces that be knew Hazelrig would kill Skeeter. Is this all part of the master plan? Whether it is or isn't, red is gone, all that remains is blue. Hazelrig goes back to his van and takes a swig of alcohol before driving off. He continues drinking and driving before he sees Mary Lee standing in the middle of the road. He follows her, crashing his van, then continues on foot. He chases her through a pumpkin patch and catches her. When he's about to do something, he's interrupted by a farm machine turning on. Hazelrig assumes the operator to be Sam Willock, and so addresses the machine's operator as Sam, saying how it was Mary Lee all the time. We then see the inside of the machine, where a shifter is moved on its own. This is the first time we see anything undeniably supernatural in the film. The question is it the spirit of Bubba or the mind control of Mary Lee? The machine moves toward Hazelrig, chasing him through the pumpkin patch before Hazelrig turns around and bumps into a Scarecrow, impaling himself with something. The machine stops. Hazelrig backs away to see it holding a bloody weapon, a pitchfork. The same weapon Bubba supposedly attacked Hazelrig with before being shot. With that, Hazelrig falls to his knees and points to the lifeless figure before dying, with his pointing being a callback to when Hazelrig was pointing his gun at the Scarecrow at the beginning of the film. And that's where it ends. Well, that's where it should end, because then we see a POV shot of the Scarecrow who finds Mary Lee. Then, for the only time in the film, we see the Scarecrow moving. He hands Mary Lee a daisy, and she says this.
Thank you, Bubba. You know what? Tomorrow, I think I'll teach you a new game. Did I ever show you how to play the chasing game? It's fun. You'll like it.
Implying that she's gonna teach him to kill other people, I guess? Look, I get that they probably didn't want to disappoint the audience and not show the Scarecrow at least once. But if they didn't show him, and with that, didn't show the inside of the farm machine that moved on its own, there could be so many more theories about what the exact threat of the film was. None of the villains are directly killed by anyone, besides Hazelrig killing Skeeter. And it could be possible that maybe Sam Willock did orchestrate this whole thing. Maybe nothing was supernatural at all, and, as I've mentioned, it's possible that this is all Mary Lee. She could even be controlling an otherwise flaccid Scarecrow to be her idea of Bubba. Maybe it is Bubba's spirit telling her to use said mind powers, but not likely. And that's my biggest complaint with the movie. This is such a dense and obviously well thought out and realized film, and yet there can't be much discussion about what the ending means. It's almost certain that it is the spirit of Bubba who did all the things we didn't see. And my problem with that is, if you just tell us it was Bubba all the time, why not show it happening? You could argue that it's for the mystery and suspense, and I would agree with you. But I would also say that it damages the film's rewatch value if you know Bubba was the killer all the time, and yet they didn't show things like the Scarecrow glory killing all the awful townsfolk Jason Voorhees style, which arguably would have offered more entertainment for repeat viewings. Of course, the best scenario is if the ending was more ambiguous. To me, it would fully elevate this film from the slasher genre entirely. But there's still so much the film did right that separates it from your run-of-the-mill retro horror flick. It's not a perfect movie, but a low-budget, made-for-TV horror film was never going to be. The fact that even with all it had going against it, including the very category it's lumped in with, that it could be a movie with motivated and layered visual storytelling, honestly some of the best TV acting I've ever seen from Charles Durning, a well-written script that's smart and contains rich characters, and a general sense of cohesion between all aspects of the film makes this movie leagues better in an objective filmmaking sense than it had any right to be. I think the key takeaway from this video, if there is one, is don't let the category or nature of what you create limit the project. Dark Night of the Scarecrow could have been void of the things that I believe elevate it from your average slasher flick, and no one would have looked twice. Its made-for-TV slasher flick box it was placed in wasn't an excuse to have poor performances, or lackluster writing, or bland cinematography. It excelled in those areas because it's a piece of art with a message beyond what on the surface seems to be just saying, don't pick on people who are undeserving. I think this goes to show that many films have a depth that can only be explored by a viewer putting in the time and effort to extract those subtextual themes. This film even has an invisible influence, as it is widely regarded as the film that began the trope of haunted scarecrows. It even spawned a 2022 sequel, written and directed by J.D. Feigelson, the writer of the original, my opinions on which should perhaps be saved for a dedicated video. It sucks. Because Dark Knight of the Scarecrow was made so well and with such caution, I believe it has stood the test of time. I've been working on this video for close to a year now, and when I wrote the outro months ago, I left on a call to action to give this film more attention. Since then, I've actually noticed an increase in its popularity. Notably, it was posted on YouTube by Cult Cinema Classics only a couple months ago and already has over 3 million views. I love to see it getting more attention, and I truly recommend the movie to anybody who hasn't seen it yet. 7 out of 10. Otis P. Hazelrig, a man who was killed thanks to the same sense of justice he himself swore by. A man who never thought he could be on the receiving end of justice until it was too late. A man so uniquely evil, perhaps he never deserved a second chance. All we know for sure is that someone's idea of justice was served that night, and we're all better off with the Otis P. Hazelrigs of the world being forced to face the ugliness of their actions. So remember this, in all you do. Maybe, just maybe, you too will be forced to face what you've done. So, be nice and stuff.
Hey, I thought I told you to stop filming in here.
Okay. I'm gone.
Dude, I told you this one. I watched this one movie called Dark Knight of the Scarecrow. All right? And it was like back in the day, a lot of horror films were scarier than today's because they had bad special effects. It was all about building up the suspense. So I watched this movie, Dark Knight of the Scarecrow. And I'm trying to remember. It was basically, there was some special needs guy, which was a big trope in fucking horror movies, I think, back in the day, right? Some mentally challenged kid, and some woman died. The hot chick in the town died, and I think the guys, the cool guys in town did something to her and killed her, so they blamed the special needs kid. They were like, it was him. He was like, he was like one of these guys, he was like, still living at home. He was like 24 or something. So they fucking chased him out into a cornfield, and the kid was trying to hide, and he got into the Scarecrow. And then they saw him in there, and they all knew he was in there. They're all acting like, what is it? And they fucking blew the guy away. Jeez. All right? So then, like, the next day, a couple days later or whatever, one of the guys that helped kill him is hanging in his house with his hot girlfriend, and she's just going like, hey, I really appreciate all the work you've done around here, blah, 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 blah. And she goes, yeah, when did you put up the Scarecrow out in the field? He goes, I didn't put a Scarecrow up there. And then they just cut to the field. It's like, kink, that noise, and the fucking thing is out there. The same fucking dude. And this guy goes back and starts killing all of the guys. Dude, it was so fucking scary. I was actually rooting for the townspeople. I was rooting against the special needs kid who was killed. I wanted him to kill him again just so I could the movie would be over.